Hello, everyone, and welcome to Libraries, Culture, History, and Society, or LCHS, and our Prospective Author webinar. My name is Julie Judkins, and I am an associate professor and the department head of the Special Collections and Archives Research Center at Oregon State University. My current research involves the ethical archiving of misinformation and conspiracy theories, as well as mindful academic library management. I have published previously in the American Archivist, Collections, and the Journal of Copyright in Education and Librarianship. I'm joined today by my co-editor, Jason Martin, and I will turn the floor over to Jason to introduce himself.
Thank you, Julie. My name is Jason Martin. I'm the Dean of the Evans Library at the Florida Institute of Technology, better known as Florida Tech. My research interests include leadership, organizational culture, and libraries as a workplace. And I've been published in college and research libraries and the Journal of Academic Librarianship.
So a good place to start is to, as a prospective author, you might be curious who our audience is and what we publish. So here's some text from our website that discusses our scope and what our audience is. Libraries, Culture, History, and Society, or LCHS, as I said, is the official peer-reviewed journal of the Library History Roundtable of the American Library Association. It is the only journal in the United States devoted to the history of libraries and librarianship. LCHS positions library history as its own field of scholarship and features scholars from a broad array of disciplines to examine the history and cultural context of libraries as institutions, collections, and services, as well as the experiences of library employees and users. There are no limits on time period or geographical location, and research on libraries of every type is welcome. While many of our authors have a background in librarianship or libraries, we are also interested in submissions from authors who work outside of librarianship, but have research interests related to the history of libraries and librarianship. So moving on, we are going to cover a few topics related to publishing in LCHS, and Jason's going to start us off.
So the first thing that you want to consider with any research project is going to be the scope and originality of the article. So articles for LCHS can be on the history of libraries and librarianship, or the intersection of libraries and librarianship and culture, and libraries and librarianship and society. It can be on any type of library and is not constrained by any kind of geographic area or historical era. You want to make sure, however, that your selected topic is appropriate in its scope. For instance, writing an article on the history of public libraries in America from 1700 to 2000 is far too broad, even for a book, and it's not appropriate in the scope. Your scope can also be too narrow. So writing on a 3-month span of a branch library is also not appropriate in scope unless something really amazing and spectacular happened. And of course, you want your article to be original. So don't cover topics or events that have already been published on. Now, you can build on previous work and you can address the shortcomings in the previous work, but you don't want to duplicate the work and write on something that's already been published. And this is why the literature review is so important. And Julie's going to talk a little bit more about the literature review.
Right. So if you have read academic articles before or written them yourself, you probably are familiar with the section, the literature review, that demonstrates that you have done your homework, that you are not duplicating other research that's already been done, and that you have a good grounding in the topic that you're writing about. So that's an important section in your paper, even if you're saying this is a gap in the literature and nobody has studied this. You want to show what maybe relevant topics have been covered and where your research fits into that. Your literature review certainly doesn't need to be exhaustive, but it should establish what scholarship that you're building on. One tip, if you are new to writing academic articles or to writing literature reviews, One tip is to, if you're looking for finding articles related to your topic, is to look at citations and articles that you read as you're doing your research to see who the authors cited as foundational to their work. You'll know if you've done a comprehensive literature review once you keep running across the same articles again and again.
Now, whether you're writing on history or some other area, primary sources are very important. They provide a firsthand account of the time period, the event, or the person that you're writing about. And when examining these documents, it's important to remember there are many ways they can be read and interpreted. And you shouldn't just simply give a straightforward account of the source. Nor do you want to just simply provide a timeline of events. You want to provide contextual analysis of the events, and this is where a theoretical framework is very valuable. A theoretical framework helps you see events and sources in a particular way and helps you to sort your data and arguments into various pieces or ideas of the framework. For example, economic determinism, which is that our events are moved along by economic relationships, is a theoretical framework. And so if you were, say, writing about this change and this history of this branch library, you could use this kind of economic determinism to talk about the advances in programs and the changes in how the library operated were in part because of the close relationship with the Chamber of Commerce and local businesses. So the libraries, they were adapting to meet the needs of those businesses. Now there's a whole host of frameworks that are out there, right? But you do not have to choose one of them, right? You can use a framework on change from a book that you recently read or liked. So if you look at the social science literature, again, you'll see there are lots of these kinds of theoretical frameworks out there. Again, you're free to choose one of those. An historical framework, there's a lot of historical frameworks out there. But you can also use a different kind of framework as well, not something that's sort of readily used in other fields, but they happen to be something that you came across that you really liked, that you thought fit and worked very well with the time frame and the subject that you're writing about.
And as you're writing, you also want to keep in mind that your primary task is to communicate your ideas clearly. And in that regard, nothing is better than a simple declarative sentence. Don't cloud your argument in overly complex vocabulary or feel like you need to adopt a pretentious scholarly voice. That's not necessary. While you don't want to use slang or write informally, what's most important is getting your point across and using direct to the point language. You want to avoid passive voice overall. For example, instead of saying the exhibit was written by the librarians, instead say the librarians wrote the exhibit. Another thing to keep in mind as you are submitting to LCHS is that we require a positionality statement, and we do not review any work that comes in where the author has not filled out a positionality statement. So for your article to be reviewed, you need to complete that final step. LCHS requires all authors to submit a positionality statement to communicate how their identities qualify them to write about their topic. The intention of asking for a positionality statement, which is related to our DEI action plan, is to limit author bias and also ensure that underrepresented groups are not being exploited. So if, for example, you are writing about an underrepresented group, it would be best practice to find a co-author who if you are writing about an underrepresented group and you are not a member of that group, it would be a best practice to find a co-author or a consultant that you can credit who can help you make sure that you are limiting any bias and also that we are including underrepresented voices in the telling of their own stories. So that's why we require a positionality statement. We will have our emails at the end. If you have any questions about that or how that might fit into your work, we're always happy to answer those.
So the journal gets a lot of graduate students who submit class papers for articles, and that's great. We love it when graduate students get involved in the scholarly conversation. But a good class paper still needs some work to be published. And there's a great book out there called Writing Your Journal Article in 12 Weeks. And we'll include a link to that in the video description. We don't have any kind of economic interest, financial interest in this book. It's just been a really good book that's helped me and other people that I've known to be able to turn a graduate class paper into a published article in 12 weeks. And it really also can help people as well who are just kind of starting from the beginning. But it's a fantastic resource for those who aren't familiar with academic publishing.
I think we need to start asking for proceeds from the author for referring people. So another thing to keep in mind is that LCHS uses Chicago style, specifically author date and reference style. So this is a fairly recent change if you've looked at the publication before or have submitted before. So this is something that you will want to note if you've been in the process of preparing your article and you have used a different format. You will want to make sure that you switch it over to author date before you submit your article to the journal. So author date uses parenthetical citations in the text to reference the source author's last name and year of publication. If you are needing to look up in Chicago Manual of Style to give you some guidance, you will want to look at chapter 15 and to a lesser extent chapter 14, but most of the information that you'll need will be within chapter 15. And then Jason, I think you are going to talk about how to respond to a revise and resubmit, and we will wrap up our webinar.
Yeah, so once you submit your article and the reviewers review it and they send it back to the editor, it's typical to get a revise and resubmit, which is actually a good thing. They liked your article. They just said, here's some ways that the article can be improved. I have a patented 3-step process to responding to these. The first step is to say that these reviewers don't know what they're talking about, and they would never know good literature if it bit them. I'll then come back to their comments, maybe a couple days, maybe a week later, and say, well, I guess these comments are okay, but they still don't know what they're talking about. And then step 3 is I come back in a couple of days or a week and I say, I just do the suggestions and just make those revisions. You can save yourself a lot of time and hassle if you just skip to step 3 and just do the revisions and make the suggested changes that the editor and the reviewers have suggested and submitted. Now there is some times when you don't want to do that, when it might change what you're actually trying to say or actually trying to do. You want to stand firm in that and say, this is really not what this article is about. But otherwise, they're there, the editor and the reviewers are there to help. And usually almost 99.9% of the times their suggestions are good and they're helpful, and you can just implement them in your article and you'll have a better article when you do it.
Yeah. And I think that's really good advice, Jason. I think comments can often feel very personal, but they really are not meant to be. And the editors, the peer reviewers really want to make your work the best that it can be. And I agree. I have also been in that defensive place of thinking, people don't know what they're talking about, but then in the end, I have realized that it makes my work better. And I also think it's a good learning opportunity as well, if you can get through that. And certainly I think it's good to point out that there are times where maybe feedback is maybe not possible for whatever reason, whether it's changing the scope of your article, and it's also important to stand up for yourself at that point. So
yeah, it's important. Academics can be very cutting and very critical. And it's not a personal attack, and it can feel that way because you spend so much time on the work. If just take a little step back when possible and realize, yeah, they are trying to help.
Yeah. So that concludes our advice and our webinar. I have put our emails on screen. So if you have any questions, either about the content of this webinar or any other questions about submitting, possible needs for mentorship related to LCHS, please let us know. And we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much for your time and for watching.